appreciated the Sunday school lesson a lot. And as we were studying through that, and what all David went through, and Goliath, and what all that looked like, and I shared in Sunday school, I look around at the young people in our congregation. I do. And I look and I say, there's a David. And there's a David. Encourage our young people. And when you see them doing something Christ-like or David-like even, encourage that and encourage them. Say, wow, that reminds me of David, or that reminds me of Samuel, or that reminds me of Paul. Encourage the young people. That reminds me of Christ. They need it. All right. Today, take your Bibles and turn to Genesis chapter 14. Genesis chapter 14. It's a story in Genesis chapter 14 that we don't hear often. We hear it some. We're somewhat familiar with it. We are a little more familiar with what happened leading up to this story and then after this story. We're not as familiar with the story in Genesis chapter 14. And I've simply titled the message this morning, Covenant. Covenant. And we will partake in communion this afternoon as a reminder of the covenant relationship that we have with God. Covenant. Genesis chapter 14. Before this, we have Abraham and Lot. And we know, Lot is Abraham's nephew, and Abraham is considered the patriarch. Okay, it's a patriarchal society. The patriarch, the oldest man in the group, was responsible in those days for all of his family. All of his family. They literally pooled all their resources together. And if I had resources and you had resources and somebody else needed help, we would all lend our resources to make sure that the person was taken care of. It's a patriarchal society that they lived in. And Abraham was the patriarch. That's why when his brother died, he took care of his nephew, Lot. And so they come together, and after a little while, we have Lot's herdsmen and Abraham's herdsmen, and there was too many people all in one location. Okay? And it was actually a fair amount of people all in one location. Some studies have shown that it was literally up to 2,000 people in Abraham's clan and up to like 1,500 people or so in Lot's clan. That's a lot of people. Men, women, and children, servants, relatives. We think of, okay, there's just these two families that come together. And no, it was a significant amount of people that were together. And Abraham said to Lot, hey, how about you choose? There's some good land over here. There's good land over here. You choose one way and I'll go the other. And we know that Lot looked around and he said, hey, look at that over there. Over close to Sodom. There's some really nice ground. Some really nice pasture. And it says that he chose that. And he pitched his tent towards Sodom, which there's a whole other message, and that's not what we're getting into today, but there's a lot of danger in that, pitching your tent towards Sodom. What is your focus on? What is your focus on? Before this, even before Abraham and Lot, we have Abraham in the wilderness, and God says to Abraham, Abraham, you see all this land around you? See it all? I'm going to give it to you and your descendants. And your descendants are going to be so numerous, you're not going to be able to number them. And this is the land that I have for you. And of course, Abraham's like, Yeah, okay, that's nice. I'll take it. But I only have one problem. I don't have any descendants. Just don't have any at that point. Different story. Okay. So anyway, God had promised them the land, and so they're in this area, this land. You have a lot over here towards Sodom, and Abraham took the people call it the rough country. I don't know if it was all that terrible rough. It was still pretty good. It was still pretty good. And so during this time, somewhere in there, I'm not exactly sure where in there, but there was 4 kings in the north that came down and conquered 5 kings in the plains, which included Sodom and that whole area in there. And I am not going to read all the names because those names we need practice for reading all those names, and it's in Genesis chapter 14 in here. So there was 4 kings in the north that came down and conquered the 4 territories in the plains there, the 4 kings in the plains, and they were subject to them for 12 years. They pretty much could rule their own kingdom. They just had to pay taxes to the kings in the north. So it was like taxation without representation, right? We kind of had a problem with that a few years ago in the United States. Well, more than a few years ago now. But taxation without representation. And they got tired of it. They did 12 years of this. In the 13th year, in verse 4 of Genesis chapter 14, it says, 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year, they rebelled. They said, nah, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to pay taxes to those kings. Let them come and take it from us. That was kind of their attitude. We're not going to do it. Absolutely not. And so in the 14th year, those 4 kings from the north came down through and conquered the 5 kings of the plains. And it said that they ran into like this area, they call them slime pits. In verse 10, it says, in the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there. And they that remained fled to the mountains. Slime pits. Very fascinating thing about these slime pits. They're not just pits full of ooey gooey like slime. It's tar pits. I remember years ago I went on a field trip to visit some tar pits. A long time ago. And these are literally just pits full of tar. One of the things that, years and years ago with Rockefeller, when he was, doing his whole thing with the oil, he read this portion of scripture and said, wait a minute, if they had tar pits over there, that means there's oil. And he went over there and he found oil. Fascinating. Use scripture to direct him. It's literally tar pits. It's oil that was coming up out of the ground. And it was close to Sodom. A lot of people believed that when God rained down fire and brimstone, that these tar pits lit on fire as well and would burn for a very, very long time. And it just completely made everything super, super heated, super hot. So anyway, they fell into these tar pits. A lot of them were killed in the tar pits, the slime pits. And those that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah. So these are the 4 kings of the north. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. And they took Lot, Abraham's brother, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And we'll find out later on that they didn't just take Lot and his family. They literally took, I don't know if it was all of the women and children, but a good portion of the women and children from Sodom, and all the goods, all their food, all of their cattle, all of the stuff. They're just like, we'll just take this with us. Spoils of war. We'll take it with us. Well, Abraham heard about this. And Abraham says, well, we've got a problem. We've got a problem. I know that there was 4 entire armies that came down as one army, that came down, defeated the 5 kings, but my nephew is with them and his family. I'm the patriarch. I can't just let this go. That's what he was saying. I can't just let this go. I can't just let this slide. I have to do whatever I have to do in order to get him back. So remember that. That's part of covenant. We're going to look at covenant. Why? What motivated him to do this? What motivated him to go and get his nephew back? Which they did not agree on a lot of things. And it was covenant. Because he was keeping his end of the bargain, of the covenant relationship that he had with his entire family. So the patriarchal society was. So anyway, verse 14, when Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive, and it says his brother, I find that very fascinating. It does not differentiate between Lot's father and Lot. Does not differentiate. And actually, we'll read a lot later on down here how Melchizedek came and how Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. But then in Hebrews, it talks about Levi paying tithes to Melchizedek. Levi wasn't born for a very long time. And the Bible doesn't differentiate between Levi and Abraham. Same family. Same name. Fascinating. Fascinating. Okay, anyway. So he says, when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants. Okay? He armed his trained servants born in his own house. So the servants that were trained and that were born in his own house. 318 of them. These are the servants that he could trust. These are the servants that were loyal to Abraham. 318 of them. These are just the men. Can you see how big his family? I'm sure he treated them like family. His family was? Wow. 318 of them. So we got 318 guys. What was that, like 3 of these buildings, if the building was completely full, 3 of these buildings full of people, okay? And we're going to go out against the United States Armed Forces. How are we going to fare? Not real well. Not real well. And Abraham's like, oh well, this is what I've got to do. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go get them. Okay, guys, ready? And they're, yep, absolutely. So they chased them down all the way up to Dan. And Dan was north of the Sea of Galilee. So they had quite a hike to get to them. Chased them down all up to Dan. And then they engaged in battle at night. He says they divided and they engaged in battle at night. And then they pursued them all the way up to the area of Damascus. So that was another 70 miles or so that they engaged them during nights. I don't know how many nights it was. It doesn't really say. And here we have 318 men walking away with all of the men, women, and children, Lot's family, and all of the spoils of war that they took. He defeated 4 kings' armies with 318 men. Now remember our story about Goliath here. This seemed like a David and Goliath situation. It really did. And here we have Goliath, who is, taunting and making fun of. And I asked him in Sunday school, why did they allow him to set the terms? Who gave him the right to set the terms? I don't quite understand that. And so many times in life, we allow Satan to set the terms of the battle. And no. We go to God and they say, God, here's the battle. What do you want me to do about it? How do I engage in the battle? It doesn't really matter what Satan says. Because, Funny thing was, here's this giant 9-foot guy who says, let one man come out and fight me. The guy's a coward. Serious. He's a coward. I'm like, wow. But anyway, these men here, 318 men, obviously not cowards, go up, and I don't know what all their battles look like, but they took Lot, his family, all the spoils of war back. And then we'll pick up in verse 17. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine. Now Melchizedek, I would encourage you guys to study Melchizedek sometime. He is a type of Christ of some sort. We don't exactly know a lot about Melchizedek. It says the king of Salem. Most people believe it means Jerusalem. Okay, but he was a type of Christ. Don't know a lot about him. He's brought up again in the New Testament as well. But fascinating study. Not part of what we're into today. So anyway, so Melchizedek brings out bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. So he was a king and a priest at the same time. Type of Christ. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which has delivered thine enemies into thy hand. Okay, we'll stop right there. Who delivered the enemy? Who won the battle? God. With David and Goliath, who won the battle? It was God. It was 100% God. David knew that beyond a shadow of a doubt. And Abraham did also. He knew it beyond a shadow of a doubt. I'm going to go out there and it's going to seem like so impossible that when we win, God is going to look good. And I wonder how many times in my own life I look at an impossible situation and I think, eesh, if I mess this up, what's it going to make me look like? And I turn the focus on me instead of on a good God that we serve. So anyway, he said, God has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he, being Abraham, gave him tithes of all. Of all. And first time I read down through here, it's like, okay, so he gave him tithes of all of the spoils of war? Or what did he give him tithes of? Tithe means 10%. Okay, he gave him a tenth of everything. Tithe of everything. Tenth of everything. Hold on to that thought of where he got the tithe from. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. So, you know what? I thank you. You did an amazing job. I don't know how you did it, but it was good. Can we just have our people back? You can keep all the spoils of war. You can keep everything, all the goods. If we could just have our women and children back. Can we please have the people back? That's what he says. Okay? And Abram, verse 22, and Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take of anything that is thine, lest thou shouldst say, I have made Abraham rich. So he's saying, I don't want your goods. I'm going to give it all back to you. I'm going to give your goods. I'm going to give your people. I don't want to take anything unless all of a sudden somewhere down the road you will take some credit for what God did. And I don't want you taking any credit for what God did. David was the same way. I don't want any credit for what God just did. never, ever, ever agree to the terms that are set by the enemy. What would have happened if David would have been like, okay, you know what, or we're going to agree to these terms, and we're going to go out and we're going to conquer, and then we're going to have a bunch more servants. Well, David wasn't even worried about the servants. He knew it wasn't going to happen anyway, because the enemy didn't uphold their end of the bargain, right? He killed them, and what happened? Oh yeah, now we're your servants now. No. They didn't stick around to become servants. And same thing here with, so you can keep the people, or you can keep the goods. Just give me the people. David's like, no, you take it all. He said, actually take everything except for, well, you know what? Some of my guys gonna eat some of your food on the way back through. We ate some, so you can't have that back. And I did promise 3 guys their share. So once they take their share, and we all kind of already ate some of the stuff, you can have everything else. He didn't say you can't have the stuff that we ate, and you can't have the share that I promised these 3 guys, plus the 10% that I gave to Melchizedek. Where'd that 10% come from? Came from Abraham's own possessions. He paid tithe of his own possessions, of the increase that he had personally. This stuff he looked at was never even his. And I wonder how many times we look at stuff and we're like, that's mine. I want to claim responsibility to it. I want to claim whatever it is. It's mine to use, mine to enjoy. And when God says, I want it, we're like, Abraham's like, here's all your stuff back, king of Sodom. I'm going to give 10% of my own stuff to this guy who just blessed me. That's how God is. That's how God is. So we have Abraham who practiced covenant. A covenant, and we're going to look at what exactly a covenant is. What motivated Abraham to do this? To literally put his own life on the line in the lives of 318 of his best servants on the line. A covenant is a solemn agreement that is made in the presence of God that binds parties together in a permanent, defined relationship. Okay, so it's a solemn agreement that is made in the presence of God that binds parties together in a permanent, defined relationship. It's permanent. It cannot be broken. Absolutely permanent. And remember, when God made the covenant with Abraham, and God says, you know what, Abraham, I'm going to bless your seed. I'm going to bless your generations. All you have to do is be perfect. You and all your generations. It's all you need to do. And he says, go ahead and get the covenant sacrifice ready, Abraham. This is going to be good. I can't wait to enter into covenant with you. I'm going to bless you. The Messiah is going to come through you. The world's going to be changed through your seed. All you got to do is be perfect. Just one thing. So Abraham gets the covenant ready. Sacrifice ready, splits all these animals into, lays them in, on either side of the trench. And what they would do is they would walk through the trench with the blood flowing into it. And the covenant was so severe and so binding that you were saying, if I ever break this covenant, let me become as one of these animals. That's what it was. And Abraham, it says he sat there from morning until afternoon and could not walk through. He could not walk through because he knew that even if he was able to uphold this being perfect thing, there's no way all his descendants would. And he took it very, very seriously. And so God walked through the covenant. God walked through in fire and in smoke. God walked through twice. Once for God, once for himself, once for Abraham. Because he said, I know there's no way for you to uphold this, so I'm going to do it for you. So anyway, a covenant is a permanent thing. Permanent. That's one part of covenant. Another part of covenant is you have to have a vow or a promise, whatever you're promising to do. So if I promise to give Dave, anytime you ever need my help for anything, whatever it is, and you promise the same thing to me, and we're going to be covenant relationship, okay? And all my resources are your resources, and your resources are my resources, and this is literally what we do with our church body and church membership. It is. It's a covenant relationship. Okay, so if I get to Dave and I say, okay, everything is mine, what's yours is mine, what's mine is yours, and we're going to set these terms, the vow, the promise, whatever it is. There has to be some vow or promise. We can't just be like, I'm going to enter into covenant relationship with Dave. About what? You got to have a promise. You know what I mean? You have to have a commitment to something. So a promise. And in Hebrews 8:6 it says in the New Testament it says the New Testament is a better covenant established on better promises. I love that. It's a better covenant. The new covenant, New Testament, new covenant is a better covenant established on better promises. When we enter into covenant relationship with Jesus Christ, there is no other covenant like it. There is no other relationship like it. See, we enter into covenant relationship when we say I do up in front of the preacher with our wife. We do. That's covenant relationship. And we get covenant and contract kind of mixed up in our world today. A covenant says, you know what? It is till death do us part. That's covenant. A covenant says, I don't care what all we go through, what all happens. I'm going to be part of this relationship because of covenant. That's the same thing with Jesus Christ. Same thing with, our church body. It's covenant. It's covenant relationship with each other. A contract says, I'm going to limit my responsibilities and protect my rights and safeguard my interests. A contract is about me. A covenant is about us. And in marriages as a whole in the world around us, they're contracts. They write up their prenuptial agreements and whatever else and have separate checking accounts. I have an issue with that, by the way. I really do. I do. When a husband and wife have separate checking accounts. That is nowhere close to covenant. So you have contracts that we get mixed up with, and we're like, as soon as that person doesn't uphold their end of the contract, I'm out of here. Protects my interests. Part of covenant says that it is unilateral, which means it doesn't matter if you uphold your end of the deal. I'm going to uphold mine. That's covenant. That's covenant. So if I get together with Dave and we make a covenant, what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine, and Dave one day, has a need, and I look at Dave's need and I say, my checking account's getting a little slim and I kind of need this for boating or whatever. Okay. I can't quite share this with Dave. I'm not upholding my end of the contract, or the covenant rather, because it's not a contract. I'm looking at it as a contract. I'm not upholding my end of the covenant. But if Dave says, you know what, I understand covenant agreement, and all of a sudden 2 months later, after I've gone boating, I have a need. A contract says, you didn't help me with your need or with my need, I'm not going to help you with mine. A covenant says, I love you. And we agreed to this, and all my resources are at your disposal. That's covenant. And that's how it was with Abraham. Here we have Lot, and he chose his own way, pitched his tent towards Sodom. I'm sure there was a load of things that Abraham didn't agree with. Could have been like, he got what he deserved. But Abraham says, no, I'm in covenant. As a patriarch, I'm in covenant. And now I'm going to go and expend every resource that's available to me, and we're going to take this back. So, anyway, a couple parts of covenant again. We got the promise. We have a sign, a seal or a sign. So you have something that stamps the covenant that says, this is, you are mine. We are in covenant together. And for a marriage, it is the marriage bed. That is what seals the covenant. You keep that seal and that sign for one. For one. Don't waste the seal. This seals it, and it's a sign. We have been bought with a price by the blood of Jesus Christ, and he has cleansed us, and he has placed his life inside of us and has sealed us with his own life, saying that we are in covenant relationship. All of my resources are at your disposal. Another thing that happened in covenant was there had to be a sacrifice. There had to be a sacrifice of some sort. Whether it was animals split in two or whatever it was, there had to be a sacrifice. Jesus Christ became our sacrifice. And in marriage, there are sacrifices. There are. That we make. We say, I would prefer to do this, but I'm not going to. Or, my wife likes to go shopping at Hobby Lobby, which is a place that I don't enjoy. But she wants to go there for date night. That's fine. It's a sacrifice, a very minor sacrifice, by the way. There are a lot more major ones than that. But we no longer live for ourselves. We're not all about us. Same thing with Christ. We are not about us. We are bought. Sacrifice has been made. Another thing that happened with covenant was you would take part of that person's name. You would take part of that person's name. And we still do that today with marriage. We still do it today. I would be severely offended if I got married, years ago, and my wife's like, Graber's a better name. It's easier to play that game that, when people ask you what's your last name, it's easier to play that game. I think Dexter's really tough to play that game, by the way, really tough. And she's like, I don't really like the name Dexter. I'm going to kind of leave that go. I'm like, I'd be severely offended. Actually, I probably would have walked away. Because I'm like, you don't want my name? Wow, that would have been really rough. Thank you for taking my last name. But we take the name. We have taken the name of Christ on our lives. And with that name has all the authority and all the responsibility and all the privileges that come along with that name. It's part of covenant. Part of covenant. Covenant surrenders all of my rights and assumes all of the responsibilities of the other person. That's what it does. It's no longer about me. It is about the other party, the other individual. And if we can get that understanding in our heads with marriage, and we can get the understanding in our heads with our relationship with Christ, it is no longer about me. It's no longer I who live, but it's Christ who lives in me. We would have, it would just go really, really, really smooth and really well, because that's the way God intended it to be. covenant ends only through death. That's when it ends. Only through death. Is your relationship with Christ a covenant or a contract? Is your relationship with your spouse a covenant or a contract? Is our relationship with each other a covenant or a contract? Really? As believers, we enter into covenant relationship not only with Christ, but each other. And that's really important. It really is. Do we love each other that much? I think we do. I think we do. So I would encourage us to, whenever there's these times in our lives where we're like, I am tempted to do my own thing, or tempted to be self-centered, or whatever it is, remember the covenant. Remember the covenant that Christ has shared with us and given to us. And remember it today. That's part of the communion service, is remembering that covenant. Because in the Old Testament, when they would make the sacrifice and they would throw the blood up in the air, literally, they would say, God, remember your promise. The promise was that your seed will be blessed, the Messiah will come from your seed, and the whole world will be blessed because of you. That was the promise. So they were throwing the blood up in the air and saying, God, remember your promise. And when we partake in communion, we are saying, God, I remember the promise that I have made and that you have made. I remember your covenant. And actually, quite frankly, there's nothing inside of me that understands somebody who looks at the covenant and says, I'm going to walk away from it. I don't get it. I do not understand that. The only thing I can figure out is we didn't understand covenant to begin with. Didn't understand what it looked like. I don't know. Let's go before the Lord in prayer.